Well, good morning and welcome to our continuing coverage on Buckeyes Now. I'm Brendan Gulick, and it is Saturday of the Big Ten tournament. And boy, do we have a matchup that we've been looking forward to and hoping for. After a couple weeks ago, we got teased with perhaps the college basketball game of the year. It's a rematch between Ohio State and Michigan, this time with a Big Ten championship game berth at stake. And we're joined by Brandon Brown with our partners over at Wolverine Digest on Fan Nation to kind of talk about this game a little bit, preview it, and hopefully help generate a little excitement for a game, frankly, that I would imagine, Brandon, everybody's probably already excited for in the first place, simply because it's the rivalry. But if you think about where the Big Ten has been all year long, I really do think, regardless of what the seed numbers for this tournament look like, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, and Ohio State appeared to be the four best teams. Purdue's had a great season, and they will certainly be an NCAA tournament team. But I think the four best teams in the league are left in this tournament, and there are two really good semifinals today. And frankly, any one of these four teams is capable of winning the tournament. I think that's what makes this tournament so fun.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I remember, as soon as it was finalized that Ohio State was going to be the matchup, I'm thinking, man, they're the 5 seed. They hit a little bit of a slump down the stretch of the regular season here, but for a long time they were talked about as a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So they're as good as anybody in the country. And you mentioned it. The first matchup between these two teams was firepower back and forth, and Michigan got out of there with a close win. But it's going to be should be a really fun matchup today. And again, I would expect it to be back and forth, pretty close. I don't really think either team would pull away from the other, so it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And should set up for one of the better semifinals that I can remember.
Well, and all four of these teams are extremely likely to finish some combination nationally of a 1 and 2 seed. I think coming into the week, Michigan and Illinois were projected to be 1 seeds. Ohio State and Iowa projected to be 2 seeds. But I still think there might be a door open because the difference between these teams is so small. There might still be a door open for Ohio State and Iowa to perhaps push their way into the 1 line if they win the tournament. So we'll kind of have to see how that goes. Hey, the biggest storylines that are swirling right now in fan bases as we get ready for the game, we don't have confirmation on, but certainly can't ignore the fact that both teams might be without one of their better players. Ohio State forward Kyle Young, who had a career-high 18 points in the first half yesterday, and frankly, who had played about as well as he's ever played, took an inadvertent elbow to the side of his head in the paint early in the second half. He did not return. Chris Holtman said after the game he was being evaluated for a concussion. The Buckeyes are not going to make student-athletes' medical things officially announced. They protect the privacy of those student-athletes with HIPAA laws. So we'll find out if Kyle Young is on the floor or not. Obviously, if he's not out there, that would be a big blow for a Buckeyes team that, 1, needs his size and his physicality, but 2, needs his heartbeat, because he is truly the heartbeat of this team. 1 of 2 seniors, and he's had an incredibly good year, trying to gut through some really tough circumstances with a leg injury as well. Boy, I really hope Kyle Young is able to play today, and even beyond today, if the Buckeyes, could at least get him back the next week. Kyle did have a concussion a couple weeks ago against Michigan State that kept him out of that game. So that's certainly a worrisome spot for Ohio State fans. Hopefully he's able to go, but we won't know until 1 o'clock. On your side, Brandon, it sounds like Isaiah Livers potentially may not be available too.
Yeah, he kind of had a weird landing/plant with his foot on a fast break yesterday and looked a little bit hobbled. I mean, nobody really thought much of it. He didn't score yesterday, and Michigan still beat Maryland by 13. So that was encouraging, actually, while the game was going on. He looked a little off. He wasn't able to find the range from the 3-point line, and he only played 15 minutes, which is, considerably less than he normally does. And so people kind of wondered, was he okay, or has he just had an off day? And the backup unit was so good for Michigan that Juwan just decided to go with that, and kind of led to the comeback and eventually led to a pretty easy win. And then after the game, obviously, Juwan Howard was ejected with the little dust-up with Mark Turgeon early in the second half. And Phil Martelli ran the show the rest of the way, and then after the game, he gave an interview to a Philadelphia newspaper. He spent a lot of time up in that region. They still hold him in high regard, and he mentioned something just very casually. Isaiah was out there, but he had hurt his foot, so it threw our rotation off a little bit. And then rumors started to swirl into the evening last night that Livers may have broken a bone in his foot. Again, no confirmation, just like you said with Young. And we won't know. I mean, it's not like they're going to send out a release saying that Isaiah Livers is not going to be able to play, but it'll be known pretty early once warmups and shoot around starts if those guys aren't out there. And yeah, kind of the same deal. I mean, he's a senior. He's played a lot of high level basketball, and then just what he brings as an actual player. I mean, 6'8", can drive, can get his own shot, mid range, 3-point line, fast break. I mean, he really does a little bit of everything. And so same deal. I mean, if he can't go, it throws off Michigan's starting five, obviously, then it eats into their rotation. It just puts everything kind of out of whack a little bit. So, again, we won't know for sure, but whenever, pretty reputable people start to buzz about something like this, there's usually some smoke to the fire, or some fire to the smoke, whatever way that goes. But, yeah, would be a big bummer if both of these teams were down one of their key players for what should be, a really nice rematch from earlier this year.
And obviously, Ohio State has won 2 nail-biters, coming into today's game. I mean, they truly squeaked past Minnesota in a game where, they had a double-digit lead with less than 2 minutes to go and had to hang on late. That lead was cut at 1 point to 1. And then yesterday against Purdue, led by 18 at halftime. And I think Ohio State deserves a lot of credit for the free throws that they hit, because there was an 8-minute and 20-second stretch from the 15-20 mark until exactly 7 minutes to go. Ohio State did not hit a single basket over more than 8 minutes, and the lead was only cut by 5 points because they converted several free throws during that stretch and still played fairly good defense. It was not by any stretch of the imagination a shooting clinic. I think they only hit 6 baskets the whole second half. But give them credit for executing from the free throw line. And then Seth Towns and Dwayne Washington were terrific in overtime, and the Buckeyes put away Purdue pretty handily in the extra 5 minutes. And then yesterday, I thought the star of the game for Michigan was Mike Smith, 18 points, but had a Big Ten tournament record 15 assists as well as those 18 points. Boy, if he plays like that today, it could be a tough matchup for the Buckeyes. And the word matchup makes me think about, there's a lot of people in the Ohio State world that think Michigan's a really tough matchup for the Buckeyes. And I think that's fair to say. Their size, their length, their athleticism. There's a lot of people objectively that would look, from an Ohio State fan perspective, look at Michigan and say, gee, this team is really, really good. But I think the thing that wasn't talked about enough, I think Ohio State poses a pretty challenging matchup for Michigan, because Ohio State's bigs, while not nearly consistently as big across the board, Ohio State's bigs can shoot it pretty well. And I think that has pulled some of Michigan's size out of the key. And it was part of the reason why it was such a high-scoring game when we saw these two teams last time. So I think both sides look at this matchup and say, gee, there's some problems here. And it might make for a game that strictly comes down to execution today, which should be a ton of fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Liddell he's an interesting guy, undersized for a center, but athletic and can step out and shoot it. And then on the flip side, though, he's got his hands full with a guy like Hunter Dickinson on the block. Austin Davis comes in off the bench and has given some really good minutes when Dickinson's been in foul trouble or just needed a break. But he is a fish out of water defending the perimeter, so Liddell would have an advantage there. So yeah, that's every game, right? You just try to find those matchups. There's going to be a guy with an advantage on one end versus a guy with an advantage on the other end, and it goes back and forth that way. So, Dwayne Washington went off against Michigan last time. I would expect him to be aggressive and kind of look to replicate that. You mentioned Mike Smith yesterday with the 15 assists. I'm really interested if Isaiah Livers is actually out. I'm really interested to see what that does to Mike Smith's game, because it's been talked about. I mean, I've watched every Michigan game, so it sounds like that's all they ever say. But for Ohio State fans maybe who don't know exactly what his background is, I mean, he was the leading scorer in the Ivy League for several seasons and used to take 20 shots a game. Now he's only taking 5 or 6. I mean, he's changed his role so much. So if Livers is out, And that's a guy that can suddenly start to be a volume shooter. I mean, we know he can shoot from the outside. He can get in the paint, even though he's not a very big guy. And again, kind of wonder what that matchup looks like against Ohio State's point guard, who's not a big dude either. I think point guards and long guards with a lot of size could give Mike Smith some trouble, but he might have a matchup where he can go get 20 points if he needs to. I mean, 18 yesterday was his season high for Michigan, but he's definitely scored more than that in the past, albeit in the Ivy League. So it's a game of matchups. It's a really intriguing matchup, even if both of those guys are out for both Ohio State and Michigan. But that's why those coaches get paid a lot of money. They got to try to figure out how to exploit each other in a short turnaround and try to get a victory to move on to the finals.
For Buckeye fans that didn't have a chance to see the Michigan-Illinois game, Ayo Dosunmu wasn't back yet, didn't play in that game, and yet a pretty convincing win for Illinois. Give Buckeye fans an idea of what happened in that game, because I think that final score surprised some people.
Yeah, it was a really surprising outcome for everybody. I mean, I think even if you asked Illinois, to be honest, they didn't expect a win like that. I mean, they're a confident team, two of the better players in the country at their respective positions in Dosunmu and Coburn. So, I mean, they're loaded. I mean, Illinois is a really good team. They can beat anybody on any given day. But to get up by, I think they were up by 30 at one point against Michigan, which hadn't happened to them all season, especially without Dosunmu. Nobody really saw that coming. But I think it was a combination of things. Hunter Dickinson is really neutralized by somebody so big and strong like Coburn that he was rendered almost useless in that game. And it really looked like Illinois, when you have a star player out like Dosunmu was, I think your team can go in one of two directions. They can say, well, we don't have a chance. Our guy is out. Or everybody can say, you know what, I'm going to take my game to another level because we have to. And that's what they did. I mean, guys were hitting incredible shots. Illinois' guards really, really pressured Mike Smith, Mike Smith is one of the speedier guards in the Big Ten. And Illinois has, I think, two guys that they can throw, Trent Frazier, and I always forget the dude's name, number 44 with the blonde hair. But they just put a ton of pressure on the ball, and it really rattled Mike Smith really for the first time all season. Coburn was a presence inside. Other guys were hitting shots from the out. It was a blitz. They just fired on all cylinders, and Michigan had one of those rare off nights where I think, if I remember correctly, all 5 Michigan starters were in single digits scoring, and it was just an off night. Off night for Michigan, combined with a very good night by Illinois, even without their best player. It was a boat race, and nobody really saw that coming. So, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but a rematch between those two teams would be really intriguing, even if Livers is out. But still, got to get through the Buckeyes today, and that's no easy task in itself.
Yeah, and I think about some of the lopsided games in the league this year that maybe people didn't expect. Another one might be the second matchup between Ohio State and Iowa in the second to last game of the regular season, after the Buckeyes had beaten Iowa on the road and, frankly, played really, really well against an Iowa team that Chris Holtmann said he thought was one of the best, if not the best, offensive team he's ever coached against. Iowa came to Columbus and pounded Ohio State. I mean, it was not a good performance. Of the 4 games in a row the Buckeyes lost at the end of the regular season, that one was really the one you walked away from saying, okay, that wasn't very good. Had a chance to beat Michigan, kind of fell apart at the end of the Michigan State game, but certainly were in it. And led Illinois by 4 points with just about a minute to go and ended up losing. I guess it was a little bit more time than that, a couple minutes to go. The Buckeyes missed their last 10 shots in a row in that Illinois game. But it was the Iowa game that, really, for whatever reason, just got away from the Buckeyes. And so, Brandon, I think it probably speaks to the quality of opponent in this league, because there are the teams in the Big Ten this year are so good. And I know people hear this all the time, but you really can't ignore this. The teams in this league this year are so good, and I think will prepare them all collectively so well for the national tournament. Because if you don't have your A-plus game, you're probably going to get beat. You can't really play a Big Ten team this year and not have your best game. Look at Ohio State. Penn State is a great example. Penn State did not have a great year all things considered, based on where they finished in the standings, just strictly wins and losses. That team played hard. And when Ohio State went to Penn State, that was a brutally difficult game for the Buckeyes. Ohio State lost at Northwestern. They got whacked early in the season by 17 against Minnesota. Those were two of the worst teams in the Big Ten this year. So when you're talking about the top-end teams in the league, I think sometimes, losses, whether they're by a big margin or a small margin, you certainly try to learn something from those games, but you recognize that if you would have played a team that wasn't quite the caliber of what the Big Ten has put forward this year, maybe some of those losses are wins, and then maybe you've got a false sense of security about how good you are. I think these teams all maybe feel their vulnerability, but also recognize their ceiling. And I think that's a really good place to be this time of year.
Yeah, I don't think there's any – it's almost like the Big Ten's pretty good this year or something, right? It's pretty obvious. I mean, Michigan's got one of those too. They got an 18-point loss against Minnesota as well, and then, of course, against Illinois, and then the rivalry game against Michigan State, who didn't have a typical Michigan State year either. So it was a gauntlet for everybody to run through the conference schedule. And former Michigan coach John Beilein on the coverage yesterday said something similar to this. He said, no disrespect to the other teams that they're going to face in the tournament, but it's almost like you could take a breath. Like, we don't have to see Luka Garza again tonight, or we don't have to see we don't have to see Kofi Coburn down there again. It's almost like a night off. You don't want, not a night off. You can't, any night of the tournament, obviously you can be beat and your season is over, but it was an absolute war this year in the Big Ten. And I mean, we're seeing that the four teams left in the Big Ten tournament are all ranked in the top 10 in the country. I mean, that's unbelievable. And so, as you mentioned at the very beginning, 2 1 seeds and 2 2 seeds, it looks like right now to start off with these four teams in the semifinals. So just really good coaching, a lot of talent, balance across the board. I mean, the way that the Big Ten is got so many teams that can go inside out. I mean, that's something you don't see on as many rosters, I don't think, year to year, but you see that with multiple teams this year, Michigan included, with freshman Hunter Dickinson. It's been a lot of fun to watch. I mean, I haven't watched a ton of other teams in the Big Ten, but you catch them before and after, or whatever the game you're about to cover is on, or wherever you're consuming your sports these days. But it was a gauntlet. It certainly was a gauntlet for some teams, and that's why Maryland's been throwing, or not Maryland, Illinois has been throwing this fit about they should be the conference champs. Well, maybe you don't lose to Rutgers and some of these other teams that they lost to at some point during the season. But again, speaks to the depth and the quality top to bottom.
And we could do a whole nother hour on that. That was quite a storm this week. And I guess on some point I understand their argument, but when you agree to winning percentage, that just is what it is. Everybody went into this year knowing the circumstances probably weren't going to be fair across the board. It was just going to be a different kind of season, and you live with it, and it is what it is. And they've got a chance to win the Big Ten tournament, and that's obviously certainly attainable for them.
And I would say, based on watching every game through the first couple of rounds, that I think they're the favorite right now. I do. I mean, even if Michigan was healthy, they look like the most complete team. And then certainly when you look at what they did just a couple weeks ago against Michigan without Dosunmu, yeah, they look formidable for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about splitting hairs here, and one night you can't shoot and can't hit, and the next night you make everything, but. Hard to disagree with that. Illinois looks really good right now. And frankly, look at Iowa last night in the Wisconsin game. Iowa, for the first time all year, won a game while scoring fewer than 70 points. This great offense. They went 2 for a million from behind the 3-point line. I think it was actually 2 for 20.
Yep.
And they started like 0 for 10 or 0 for 11 and grinded out a win against Wisconsin. It's a scary thought thinking that Iowa could win a game on the defensive end of the floor, because Wisconsin went more than 9 minutes without scoring, and I think Iowa finished the game with something like 10 blocked shots. I mean, it wasn't Wisconsin just chucking shots up that weren't going in. Iowa's defense was pretty good yesterday. So, to your point about the national tournament, whether they're 1 or 2 seeds, these 4 teams probably will be on one of those 2 lines. It would be a complete stunner if all four of these teams are not at least in the second weekend as Sweet 16 teams, and then we'll just kind of see what matchups come their way. But the Big Ten is certainly prepared. Ohio State, Michigan, Iowa, and Illinois all well for the NCAA tournament. And in the meantime, they get to have their own Final Four at the site of the Final Four in a few weeks from now, Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Before we wrap up, maybe just one thing in particular that you're looking forward to seeing today, something that really is going to have your attention.
Yeah, I mean, the Livers thing is obvious, so we'll kind of skip over that. But I think it's Hunter Dickinson. I mean, earlier in the year, he was a double-double machine. And then down the stretch, he's been neutralized a little bit, whether it's the freshman wall, quote unquote, or teams figuring him out a little bit more. But again, we've talked about that matchup. Ohio State just doesn't have a guy with that kind of length and size to check him on the inside. So I'm really curious to see if he can go get 20, 24, 28 points like he did earlier in the year against some pretty good conference opponents and really set the tone. That would go a long way if Isaiah Livers is out, who's another 20-point scorer on a good night and can be a real threat from all over the floor. And then Mike Smith, just to see how he follows up after yesterday. Such an incredible performance, 15 assists, just getting everybody involved. He's going to have to do even more if Isaiah Livers is out. So I would say the Livers thing is the number one development. See if he's in or out of the lineup. But if not, what does Hunter Dickinson do? And every game from this point is his biggest game. And so, see how the freshman can handle that. And if he can get back to some of those early season forms that we saw where he was putting up 25 a night and 12 boards. So be really important against a team that doesn't have a lot of size, but again, kind of creates an interesting matchup because of the foot speed, the athleticism, being able to stretch out a little bit with Ohio State's bigs.
On the Ohio State side, obviously Kyle Young is the major first storyline for sure. But beyond that, Dwayne Washington, for whatever reason, seems to play his best against Michigan. Buckeye fans are awfully happy about that. He had a couple of great games against Wolverines last year. And had a career-high 30 a couple weeks ago in that 5-point loss. Especially if Kyle Young is not available. Dwayne Washington has never seen a shot that he doesn't want to take. But recently, he's been pretty efficient on the offensive end, and he's been really good in this Big Ten tournament so far. So I think the Buckeyes need to lean on him. And by the same token, Justin Arns, probably a month ago at this point, was in the conversation with some of the nation's best and most consistent three-point shooters. His success rate had been off the charts, and he was good for 2 or 3 a night, no problem, and usually only missed 1. In the last 6 games, he's only hit 3 total three-pointers. Last night, he was 0 for 5 from the floor. His confidence, I haven't spoken to him. I don't know where it is, but I have to imagine that, he's got to try to have a closer's mentality in baseball, if you will, and just sort of, shake off the fact that things haven't fallen for him lately, because he's got the talent, he's got the ability, and Ohio State desperately needs him to get back to his form, even if it's just 1 or 2 a game. Not looking for him to score 15 points by burying 5 threes, although he's certainly capable of that. It's hard to envision winning games of this magnitude without consistent effort from behind the three-point line. Ohio State really didn't shoot jump shots well at all against Minnesota. They grinded out a win with more than 40 points in the paint. That's unlike them. Yesterday, a much better shooting day. Again, Kyle Young was a big reason for that. He hit 4 of 4 from three-point land in the first half. Kyle Young's not really a three-point shooter. But the way Purdue played defense against him, he got open looks and he buried them. So, Justin Arns is not going to sneak up on anybody in a scouting report for sure. Michigan is obviously aware of his ability to shoot 3. I really hope, as an Ohio State fan, I really hope that Justin Arns can find a way to knock some shots down today and get back in rhythm. So, Dwayne Washington and Justin Arns have my attention for sure. Ohio State and Michigan, 1 o'clock in the first of 2 semifinals, and then it's Iowa and Illinois at 3:30. The winners will play tomorrow at 3:30. All 3 of those games are televised on CBS from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Brandon, appreciate your time. Good luck today, and hopefully we'll have another instant classic between the Buckeyes and the Wolverines.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Brendan. Appreciate it.
You bet.